Blood trickled down Marcus's face as he stared at the badge number. Through burning eyes, he managed to take a photo of Officer Barrett's nameplate before collapsing. Miles away, his father's phone rang. Assistant Director Elijah Washington of the FBI Counterintelligence Division answered, unaware his world was about to implode. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe in exposing racial injustice, hit that like button and subscribe to follow more stories that need to be told. What would you do if you witnessed a child being assaulted by someone sworn to protect? The spring afternoon had started perfectly for 11-year-old Marcus Johnson. He'd just aced his presentation at the Oak Ridge Middle School Coding Club, where he was developing an app to help kids learn financial literacy. His teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, had even suggested he enter it in the state STEM competition. Walking home through Pinecrest Park, in their affluent Maryland suburb, Marcus felt that rare kind of happiness that comes from being recognized for something you love. The neighborhood was considered one of the safest in Riverdale County, with manicured lawns and luxury cars in driveways. It was precisely the environment Elijah and Gabrielle Washington had chosen for their children, believing their professional success could shield their family from the racial realities they had both faced growing up. Marcus took his usual shortcut through the park, where mostly white families gathered for afternoon activities. He nodded politely to a group of mothers watching their toddlers on the playground, just as his parents had taught him. Always be visible, always be polite, never give anyone reason to question your presence. Several kids from his school played basketball on the courts, but Marcus continued walking, eager to tell his mom about Miss Abernathy's competition suggestion. He didn't notice Karen Fletcher watching him from her bench near the playground. Fletcher, a 42-year-old real estate agent who had recently moved to the neighborhood, had already gained a reputation for calling the neighborhood watch about suspicious activities that inevitably involved people of color. She pulled out her phone and dialed the local police. "There's an unfamiliar black boy lurking around the children at Pinecrest Park," she reported in an urgent whisper. "He's been circling the playground for 15 minutes. This was a complete fabrication, as Marcus had just entered the park 2 minutes earlier and was walking straight through. Officer Richard Barrett received the call while patrolling nearby. At 38, Barrett had served in the Oak Ridge Police Department for 12 years, accumulating an unofficial reputation for targeting minorities while maintaining a clean official record. Among his colleagues, Barrett was known for boasting about keeping certain elements out of Oak Ridge's affluent streets. His disciplinary file contained 6 complaints of excessive force against minorities, all dismissed for insufficient evidence. Barrett spotted Marcus immediately upon entering the park, the only black child in sight. He parked his cruiser at the curb and approached with his hand resting on his holster. "Hey, you stop right there," Barrett called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet playground. Marcus stopped immediately, his stomach dropping with the instinctive fear his father had warned him about. He stood still, hands visible at his sides, just as he'd been taught. "Yes, officer," he asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Barrett closed the distance between them, towering over the 11-year-old. "What are you doing in this park ID now?" Marcus swallowed hard. "I'm walking home from school, sir. I live on Maple Avenue, just 3 blocks that way. I'm 11, so I don't have an ID yet." Barrett's eyes narrowed. "We got a call about someone matching your description acting suspicious around children. Empty your backpack." Several parents had gathered to watch the interaction, some filming with their phones. Miss Abernathy, who had been jogging through the park, recognized her student and moved closer with concern. "I wasn't doing anything wrong, sir," Marcus said, still keeping his composure. "I was just walking home from coding club." Barrett's face hardened. "Don't argue with me. What have you got in there?" "Something that doesn't belong to you." The accusation hung in the air. Marcus felt his face burning with humiliation as other kids from school watched. "Nothing, sir. Just my laptop and books." He reached for his phone in his pocket. "I can call my dad if you want to talk to him." "He's an FBI." Barrett's reaction was instantaneous. He's reaching in one fluid motion, Barrett grabbed his pepper spray and discharged it directly into Marcus's face from less than 2 feet away. The burning was instantaneous and overwhelming. Marcus screamed in pain, dropping to his knees, his hands reflexively going to his eyes, which only spread the chemical further. "On the ground now," Barrett shouted, though Marcus was already down. He grabbed the boy's arm, twisting it behind his back and forcing him face down onto the concrete path. The handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists as Barrett secured them too tightly for his small frame. Through the searing pain, Marcus heard gasps and shouts from onlookers. "He's just a child," someone yelled. "He was reaching for a weapon," Barrett responded. "I had to neutralize the threat." Another voice shouted back. "That's right, officer. You never know these days, miss." Abernathy pushed through the gathering crowd. "Officer, this is Marcus Johnson, one of my students. He's 11 years old and a straight-A student." "He wasn't doing anything wrong," Barrett barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, step back. I'm following protocol for suspicious individuals. A call was made and I'm investigating." Marcus, barely able to see through his swollen, burning eyes, remembered his father's most important lesson: if ever detained, memorize badge numbers and names. Through tears and pain, he focused on the nameplate, on Barrett's uniform, Barrett 4572. He repeated it silently to himself, as Barrett roughly pulled him to his feet. As Barrett led him toward the police cruiser, Marcus managed to slide his phone from his pocket, and despite his handcuffed hands and blurred vision, take a photo of Barrett's badge. The phone fell from his fingers as Barrett shoved him into the back seat. "Please," Marcus gasped through his burning throat, "call my father." "Elijah Washington. He's with the FBI." Barrett laughed as he slammed the door. "Sure, kid. And my dad's the president." Assistant Director Elijah Washington stood at the head of the conference table in the secure briefing room at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., commanding the attention of 12 senior agents and analysts. At 47, he had earned his position through 22 years of exceptional service, including decorated military time before joining the Bureau. The ongoing counterintelligence operation against a Russian sleeper cell was reaching a critical phase, and Elijah was reviewing the surveillance protocols one final time. "These individuals have been embedded for over a decade," he explained, highlighting locations on the digital map. "We move simultaneously at all 6 locations or not at all." His phone vibrated in his pocket, but he ignored it, continuing the briefing. This was standard procedure during sensitive operational discussions, especially in SCIF-secured rooms where communications were strictly controlled. Elijah had built his reputation on precision and protocol. As the Bronze Star recipient from his military service, and now the 3rd highest-ranking black official in FBI history, he navigated the dual identity of being both black in America and a high-ranking law enforcement official with careful compartmentalization. The vibration came again then, a 3rd time in rapid succession. "Something was wrong. Take 5, everyone," Elijah said, maintaining his composed exterior while concern built inside him. "Review the dossier while I step out." In the hallway, he checked his phone to find 7 missed calls, 3 from Marcus's school, 2 from his wife Gabrielle, 1 from their neighbor Vernon, and 1 from an unknown local number. A text from Vernon showed a partial video with the caption, "Is this Marcus Police at Pinecrest Park?" The grainy video showed a police officer approaching a young black boy. Elijah's heart stopped. He immediately called Gabrielle, who answered on the first ring. "Elijah, something's happened to Marcus." The school called saying he never checked in at aftercare, and Vernon just sent, "I saw Elijah," cut in his mind, already racing through protocols and procedures while fighting back the panic of a father. "I'm heading there now. Have you called the police department?" "They're giving me the runaround." Gabrielle replied, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Said they can't confirm if they have a minor in custody without a case number." Elijah took a deep breath, making the split-second decision to leverage his position. "I'll handle it." He returned to the briefing room long enough to inform his superior Deputy Director Mitchell of a family emergency. Mitchell, a father himself, nodded grimly. "Go. We'll reschedule." As Elijah drove toward Oak Ridge, memories flooded his mind. He recalled sitting Marcus down for the talk when he turned 10, the same conversation his own father had with him, the one no white parent ever needed to have with their child. "If a police officer ever stops, you move slowly. Keep your hands visible. Say yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. Don't argue even if you're right. Don't reach for anything without telling them first. If they arrest you, don't resist. Just remember their name and badge number. We'll handle the rest later." Marcus had looked up at him with innocent confusion. "But Dad, you're FBI. Won't they know I'm your son?" The question had broken Elijah's heart. They won't know, son, and some wouldn't care if they did. Now Elijah wondered if those careful instructions had helped, or if his son was suffering despite them. His mind turned to his younger brother Jamal, killed by police 20 years ago during a traffic stop gone wrong. That tragedy had cemented Elijah's determination to change the system from within, believing that enough good people in positions of power could make a difference. The familiar doubt crept in. Had he been naive? He dialed the Oak Ridge Police Department, bypassing the public line and using his FBI credentials to reach the command desk. This is Assistant Director Elijah Washington of the FBI Counterintelligence Division. I need to speak with your commanding officer immediately regarding an incident at Pinecrest Park. The desk sergeant's tone changed instantly. One moment, sir. Captain Thomas Reynolds came on the line seconds later. Assistant Director, this is Captain Reynolds. How can I help the Bureau today? The carefully neutral tone told Elijah that Reynolds had no idea of the connection. Captain, I have reason to believe your officers have detained my 11-year-old son Marcus Washington at Pinecrest Park within the last hour. I need confirmation of his status and condition immediately. A long pause followed. Sir, we did have an incident involving a juvenile at that location. Officer Barrett responded to a call about suspicious activity. Elijah cut him off his patience, evaporating. Captain Reynolds, let me be extremely clear. That juvenile is my son. I want to know his condition, the name of the arresting officer, and the specific allegations right now, or my next call will be to the Attorney General's office to initiate a civil rights investigation into your entire department. Reynolds' voice dropped to a near whisper. Sir, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. The juvenile was uncooperative and made threatening movements, according to the responding officer. Standard protocols were followed, including restraint measures. What restraint measures? Captain Elijah demanded, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Another pause. Chemical compliance spray was deployed when the subject made a sudden movement toward his pocket. Elijah nearly drove off the road. You're telling me one of your officers pepper sprayed my 11-year-old son. Has he received medical attention? He's being processed at the station now, sir. I'll personally look into this situation. I'm 15 minutes out, Elijah, said his voice deadly calm despite the rage building inside him. If my son hasn't received medical attention by the time I arrive, I will personally ensure that your department faces the full investigative power of the federal government. He ended the call and immediately dialed Gabrielle again. They pepper-sprayed him, Gabi, he said when she answered, his voice finally breaking. They pepper-sprayed our baby. Gabrielle, a prominent civil rights attorney who had argued cases before the Supreme Court, went silent for 3 seconds, processing the information with the clinical detachment that had made her formidable in courtrooms across the country. Document everything, she finally said. I'm calling Judge Williams for an emergency hearing. I'll meet you at the station with the firm's team. As Elijah approached the Oak Ridge Police Department, he faced the same internal struggle he'd navigated his entire career: follow the rulebook to the letter, or unleash the full weight of his authority and connections. For the first time, the choice wasn't clear. He had spent his career believing in the system and reform from within. Now his son was suffering at the hands of that very system. Was this the moment to play by the rules, or was it time to tear the rulebook apart? Marcus sat alone in the stark interview room, his eyes still burning from the pepper spray that Officer Barrett had unleashed on him less than an hour ago. The harsh, fluorescent lights intensified his pain, causing him to squint through swollen eyelids crusted with dried tears and chemical residue. His wrists bore angry red marks from the handcuffs that had been sized for adults, not an 11-year-old boy. No one had offered him water to rinse his eyes or face. No one had called his parents despite his repeated requests. He wondered if they even knew where he was. On the other side of the two-way mirror, Officer Richard Barrett stood with his arms crossed, watching the boy with detached satisfaction. Kid's lucky I didn't do worse, he remarked to Officer Jenkins, a rookie who had been assigned to assist with processing. These days they start carrying weapons younger and younger. Better safe than sorry. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. He's pretty young, though, and that call was just about suspicious behavior, not any actual crime. Barrett turned sharply. You questioning my judgment, Jenkins? 20 years on the force, I can tell when someone's about to pull something. The way he reached for his pocket classic pre-assault indicator. Officer Michaels, a 15-year veteran, entered the observation room with a troubled expression. Barrett, did you file the use of force report? Yet Captain's asking. I'll get to it, Barrett replied dismissively. Standard procedure. Suspect reached for a potential weapon. Officer safety protocol was followed. Same as always. Michaels lowered his voice. You might want to expedite that one. The kid's father just called. He's FBI and apparently pretty high up the food chain. Barrett laughed. Yeah, right. Every person we arrest suddenly has a cousin in the FBI, or an uncle who's best friends with the mayor. I've heard it all before. This one might be legit, Michaels insisted. Captain Reynolds is personally reviewing the body cam footage right now. Before Barrett could respond, Captain Thomas Reynolds burst through the door, his face flushed with anger and panic. Barrett, what the hell happened at that park? I've got an assistant director of the FBI on his way here right now saying we pepper-sprayed and handcuffed. His son Barrett's smug expression faltered slightly. Cap, I responded to a suspicious person call. Subject made a sudden movement toward his waistband. I followed protocol. Reynolds ran a hand through his thinning hair. Did you even ask for his name? Did you check his ID? He claimed he didn't have ID. Said he was 11. Barrett replied defensively. Looked older to me. And he was in an area where a suspicious person had been reported. Reynolds pointed at the monitor showing Marcus. Does that look like a threat to you? A child sitting alone in an interview room with chemical burns on his face. Barrett's jaw tightened. With all due respect, Captain, you weren't there. The situation escalated quickly. The subject was uncooperative. His name is Marcus Washington, Reynolds interrupted. His father is Assistant Director Elijah Washington of the FBI Counterintelligence Division, and he'll be here in 10 minutes. The color drained from Barrett's face. How was I supposed to know that you weren't Reynolds? Said his voice dropping. But you were supposed to use reasonable judgment before pepper-spraying a child who wasn't posing any imminent threat. Get the paperwork in order. We need to manage this situation before it explodes. Barrett nodded stiffly, but as Reynolds left, he muttered to Michaels. The blue wall has held before. It'll hold again. Outside the station, Elijah Washington pulled into the parking lot, taking a moment to compose himself before entering. He had spent his entire career navigating white-dominated spaces, learning when to assert his authority and when strategic restraint would be more effective. This situation demanded perfect control despite the parental rage burning inside him. The station's front desk sergeant looked up as Elijah approached, his expression neutral and professional. I'm Assistant Director Elijah Washington, FBI. My son Marcus Washington was brought here from Pinecrest Park. I need to see him immediately. The sergeant's eyes widened slightly at the credentials Elijah presented. One moment, sir. He picked up the phone, speaking in hushed tones. While waiting, Elijah noticed the station's demographics. The wall of honored officers showed only 2 black faces among 37 photographs. A Blue Lives Matter poster hung prominently behind the desk. The sergeant hung up. Sir, we don't have any record of a juvenile by that name being processed today. Elijah's carefully maintained composure threatened to crack. My son was detained at Pinecrest Park approximately 90 minutes ago. He was handcuffed and pepper-sprayed by one of your officers. I spoke with Captain Reynolds personally about this matter. I don't see any record of... The sergeant was interrupted by Captain Reynolds himself, emerging from a side door. Assistant Director Washington Reynolds said, extending his hand. I apologize for the confusion. We do have your son here. There was a misunderstanding during his intake processing. Elijah ignored the outstretched hand. Where is my son, Captain? Has he received medical attention for the chemical assault by your officer? Reynolds winced at the terminology. He's in interview room 3. We were just about to have our department medic examine him. That's unacceptable, Elijah stated flatly. It's been over an hour since he was pepper-sprayed. I want him released to my custody immediately, and I'll be taking him to a hospital for proper documentation of his injuries. Through a window in the hallway, Elijah caught sight of Marcus sitting alone in the interview room, his young face swollen and streaked with dried tears and pepper spray residue. The controlled facade nearly shattered at the sight of his child in pain. Captain Reynolds, I want the officer responsible for this in the room with us now, and I want all body camera footage preserved immediately. Reynolds nodded nervously. Of course, sir. Officer Barrett was responding to a call about suspicious activity in the park. I'm sure once we review all the facts... The facts, Elijah interrupted, are that an officer under your command used chemical weapons on a child who committed no crime. I don't need your interpretation of those facts. As if summoned by his name, Officer Barrett appeared in the hallway, his expression a mixture of defiance and unease. Sir, I'm Officer Barrett. I was the responding officer at Pinecrest Park. I followed all departmental protocols for handling a potentially threatening situation. Elijah turned to face Barrett fully, his voice deadly calm. You considered an 11-year-old boy walking home from school a threatening situation. Barrett's chin lifted slightly. The subject made a sudden movement toward his pocket after acting evasively. Officer safety is our primary. My son Elijah cut in, emphasizing each word was reaching for his phone to call me. He told you he was the son of an FBI agent, and instead of taking 2 seconds to verify that information, you assaulted him with pepper spray and handcuffed him. Barrett's expression hardened. With all due respect, sir, I had no way to verify his claims at the scene. People say all kinds of things during an arrest. Elijah stepped closer, his voice dropping so only Barrett and Reynolds could hear. Let me be perfectly clear, Officer Barrett. I am recording this entire interaction. I will be reviewing all footage reports and witness statements. I will personally ensure that every procedural violation is documented and pursued to the fullest extent of the law. This isn't over. Barrett's mask of confidence finally slipped, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. Reynolds quickly intervened. We'll release your son immediately. Assistant Director. We'll also preserve all evidence related to this incident for proper review. As Marcus was brought out, Elijah maintained his professional demeanor, though it took every ounce of self-control not to rush to his son and embrace him. Marcus's eyes were red and swollen, his cheeks streaked with the residue of pepper spray and tears. Despite his condition, he stood straight, his dignity intact. Dad, he said simply, his voice hoarse from the chemicals. Elijah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Let's get you to the hospital, son. As they walked out, Elijah noticed the holding cells visible from the hallway. 3 of the 4 occupied cells held Black or Hispanic individuals, despite Oak Ridge's population being less than 15% minority. He made mental note of this disparity, filing it away with the growing evidence of systematic issues in this department. At the doorway, he turned back to Reynolds. Captain, this is just the beginning. I suggest you prepare your department accordingly. Have you ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling? Comment number 1, if you believe Officer Barrett was justified in his actions, or number 2, if you think his response was excessive and racially motivated. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories that expose the reality of racial discrimination in our justice system. What do you think will happen when Marcus's mother, a prominent civil rights attorney, gets involved? The Washington family's fight is just beginning, and the next part of our story reveals how they'll respond to this traumatic incident. The emergency room doctor at Riverdale Memorial Hospital gently applied a specialized solution to Marcus's face, carefully treating the chemical burns caused by the police-grade pepper spray. You're being very brave, she told him, her kind eyes crinkling above her mask. The burning sensation should start to decrease soon, but your eyes might remain sensitive to light for a couple of days. Marcus nodded, silently wincing, as the solution made contact with his raw skin. Elijah stood nearby, outwardly calm, but internally documenting every injury, every treatment, building the case that was rapidly forming in his mind. The doctor turned to him with professional concern. Mr. Washington pepper spray at such close range can cause corneal damage, especially in children. I'd like to have our ophthalmologist take a look before you leave. Elijah nodded. Whatever he needs, doctor. And please ensure all injuries are thoroughly documented in his medical record. The sliding doors to the ER treatment area opened with a soft hiss, as Gabrielle Washington strode in her presence, commanding immediate attention despite her 5'4" frame. At 45, she had built a reputation as one of the most formidable civil rights attorneys on the East Coast, with 3 successful arguments before the Supreme Court and countless settlements against police departments nationwide. Today, however, she wasn't Attorney Washington, but simply a mother whose child had been hurt. Marcus, she breathed, rushing to the bedside. She reached toward his face, but stopped short of touching the injured areas. Baby, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Marcus attempted a smile that turned into a grimace. I remembered what Dad taught me, he said, his voice still raspy from the chemicals. Badge number 4572. Officer Barrett. I even got a picture of his badge before he took my phone. Gabrielle's eyes met Elijah's over their son's head, a silent communication passing between them. Pride in their son's presence of mind mixed with heartbreak that such lessons had proven necessary. Miss Washington. A nurse appeared with a tablet. We've put together the documentation you requested. Full photographs of all visible injuries, optical scans, and the doctor's assessment. Gabrielle nodded her thanks, immediately shifting into attorney mode as she reviewed the material. The chemical irritant was deployed at point-blank range, She noted, her voice tightening. On a minor. That's well outside acceptable use of force guidelines. Elijah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. One thing at a time, Gabi. Let's get Marcus taken care of first. The ophthalmologist arrived, conducted his examination, and provided antibiotic eye drops to prevent infection. No permanent damage, he assured them. But he's lucky. Another inch closer, and we might be having a different conversation. Once they were alone again, Marcus looked up at his parents. Will I have to go back to school tomorrow? I don't want everyone staring at me. The question hung in the air, carrying the weight of all the conversations they'd had over the years about navigating spaces as a black family in America. Gabrielle sat carefully on the edge of the hospital bed. You don't have to go back until you're ready, sweetheart. But I don't want you to feel like you need to hide either. You did nothing wrong. Marcus looked down at his hands. Karen Fletcher was the one who called the police. I heard Officer Barrett say her name when he was putting me in the car. She lives in the yellow house on Sycamore. Her son Jason is in my math class. The matter-of-fact way he identified his accuser broke something in Elijah. This was the reality they had tried so hard to shield their children from, despite knowing it was inevitable. Marcus, Elijah said carefully, we need to talk about what happens next. There are going to be a lot of difficult decisions to make. Are you going to sue them? Marcus asked directly. Make them pay for what they did. Gabrielle exchanged a glance with Elijah. We have options, she explained. We can file a formal complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division. We can pursue a civil rights lawsuit in federal court. We can take this to the media to expose what happened. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Each approach has different consequences and different chances of success. Will anything actually happen to Officer Barrett? Marcus asked, the cynicism in his young voice cutting Elijah to the core. Or will he just get away with it like they always do? The question reflected conversations he must have overheard between his parents' discussions of cases where justice had proven elusive despite overwhelming evidence. Gabrielle took Marcus's hand. The truth is, sweetheart, the system doesn't always work the way it should. I've won cases, but I've lost many more. Police officers have special protections under the law, and juries are often reluctant to hold them accountable. But Elijah interjected, your case is different in some ways. We have resources and knowledge that many victims don't have. And I have connections within federal law enforcement that could help ensure a proper investigation. The treatment room door opened again, and their 16-year-old daughter Zoe burst in her face a storm of emotions. I saw the video, she announced without preamble. It's already all over Instagram. Jasmine texted it to me. She thrust her phone toward them, showing shaky footage of Officer Barrett pepper-spraying Marcus and forcing him to the ground. This is going viral. People are outraged. Elijah and Gabrielle exchanged alarmed looks. What video? Gabrielle asked, taking the phone. Who posted this? Someone's mom from the park. Zoe explained, sitting beside her brother protectively. She was live streaming when it happened. It's got like 20,000 views already, and people are sharing it everywhere. She looked at Marcus, her expression softening. You okay, Squirt? Marcus nodded, clearly comforted by his sister's presence. It still burns a little. We need to get ahead of this, Gabrielle murmured to Elijah. If it's already public, we lose control of the narrative. Their neighbor Vernon appeared in the doorway, looking apologetic for the interruption. Sorry to barge in, but I thought you should have this right away. He held up a thumb drive. My wife was at the park with our daughters when it happened. Her angle shows everything, including what happened before the officer approached. It clearly shows Marcus just walking through, not bothering anyone. Elijah took the drive gratefully. Vernon, this could be crucial evidence. Thank you. As Vernon left, the Washington family found themselves at a crossroads. The incident had transformed from a private trauma to a potential public reckoning in a matter of hours. We need to make some decisions, Gabrielle said, addressing the entire family. Do we pursue this privately, through official channels? Or do we leverage the public attention to force accountability? Zoe didn't hesitate. Go public. Make them face consequences. Marcus deserves justice. Marcus looked uncertain. Will everyone at school know? Will they treat me differently? Elijah considered his son's concerns, alongside the strategic implications of each approach. His position at the FBI complicated matters further. Using his influence could be effective, but might also compromise the integrity of any investigation. We don't have to decide everything tonight, he said finally, but I think we need a multi-pronged approach. Gabrielle handles the legal aspects formally. I work through FBI channels to ensure an independent investigation, and we control our public engagement carefully. Gabrielle nodded in agreement. First thing tomorrow, I'll file the official complaint with Internal Affairs and prepare the federal civil rights lawsuit. I'll also contact the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division to request oversight. Marcus had been quiet, processing everything. Finally, he looked up, his swollen eyes serious beyond his years. Dad, Mom, would this have happened if I was white? The question landed like a physical blow. It was the question every black parent dreaded, the moment when their child fully recognized the reality of existing in America with black skin. Gabrielle took her son's hand. Probably not, baby. And that's why we have to fight. Not just for you, but for every child who looks like you, Elijah added. The world isn't fair, Marcus. We've tried to prepare you for that reality while also fighting to change it. What happened today was wrong, and we won't let it stand. Marcus nodded, slowly absorbing their words. Then I want to help. I want to tell my story, if it might help other kids not go through this. I want to do it. His courage in the face of trauma filled his parents with both pride and sorrow. That night, as Marcus finally fell asleep in his own bed, Elijah and Gabrielle sat in their kitchen mapping out their strategy. I'll recuse myself officially from any FBI involvement, Elijah said, but I'll make sure Patricia Rodriguez in the Civil Rights Division knows the details. Gabrielle nodded, typing notes on her laptop. I've already drafted the complaint. Judge Williams has agreed to hear our request for an emergency preservation order for all evidence first thing tomorrow. She paused, looking up at her husband. Elijah, we've spent our careers working within the system, believing we could change things from the inside. But today the system hurt our baby. Elijah reached across the table to take her hand, which is exactly why we can't back down now. We have the knowledge, the resources, and the platform to make this case matter. Marcus is counting on us to show him that justice is possible. As they finalized their plans, neither voiced the fear they both carried, that despite everything they had achieved, despite their positions of influence and authority, the system might still fail their son, just as it had failed countless black children before him. Elijah Washington stepped through the secure entrance of the J. Edgar Hoover building the following morning, his FBI credentials allowing him immediate access despite the early hour. Though he had barely slept, his appearance was impeccable as always, crisp suit, polished shoes, and the composed demeanor that had become his professional signature. The weight of dual responsibilities, as a senior FBI official and as the father of a child victimized by law enforcement, pressed heavily upon him. Director Collins was already waiting in his office, a rare occurrence that signaled the seriousness with which the Bureau was taking the situation. At 62, Collins had led the FBI through several high-profile controversies, always maintaining the Bureau's independence while navigating political pressures. Elijah, he said, rising from behind his desk. I heard what happened to your son. How is he? The personal concern seemed genuine, and Elijah appreciated it despite his guarded, emotional state. He's recovering, sir. The hospital documented chemical burns to his face and eyes, but thankfully no permanent damage. Collins nodded gravely. I've reviewed the preliminary information. It's disturbing, to say the least. I want you to know the Bureau takes this matter extremely seriously. Elijah maintained his professional composure. Thank you, Director. I'm here to formally request that the Civil Rights Division open an investigation into the Oak Ridge Police Department. This incident with my son appears to be part of a pattern of discriminatory practices. Collins gestured for Elijah to sit. I've already spoken with Patricia Rodriguez in Civil Rights. She's prepared to open a preliminary inquiry today. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I understand your personal involvement makes this situation unprecedented, Elijah. I want to assure you that the Bureau will conduct a thorough, unbiased investigation, but I also need to know how you intend to proceed personally. The question was valid, addressing the potential conflicts of interest that could compromise both the investigation and Elijah's distinguished career. I'm officially recusing myself from any involvement in the investigation, sir, Elijah responded. My wife is pursuing legal action separately in her capacity as a private attorney. I will not use my position to influence the Bureau's investigation in any way. Collins nodded with approval. That's the approach I hoped you'd take. This situation is difficult enough without adding ethical complications. As Elijah left the director's office, he found Deputy Director Patricia Rodriguez waiting for him in the hallway. At 53, Rodriguez had risen through the ranks despite the dual barriers of being both female and Hispanic in the male-dominated world of federal law enforcement. "Walk with me," she said without preamble. They moved through the secure corridor toward her office. "The civil rights team is already pulling data on the Oak Ridge PD," she informed him once they were behind closed doors. "Preliminary analysis shows significant racial disparities in their stop and arrest patterns. Black individuals are 7 times more likely to be stopped than whites in a town that's only 12% black." Elijah wasn't surprised, but the statistical confirmation still hit hard. "What about Officer Barrett?" Specifically, Rodriguez tapped on her computer, bringing up a personnel file. "Richard Barrett, 12 years with Oak Ridge PD. 6 formal complaints for excessive force, all involving minorities. No disciplinary actions taken. Internal affairs cleared him each time." She looked up, her expression grim. "The pattern is textbook, Elijah, but you know how these cases go. Police unions, qualified immunity, the blue wall of silence. They're designed to protect officers like Barrett." Elijah knew all too well. He had spent years trying to reform these very systems from within. "What about Captain Reynolds?" "Any red flags there?" Rodriguez scrolled through more data. "Nothing obvious in his record, but the departmental patterns developed under his leadership. At minimum, he's enabled a culture of impunity." She paused, studying Elijah's face. "Some of your colleagues are concerned you're making this personal, that you might compromise your objectivity." The implication was clear. His response to this incident could affect how seriously his future work would be taken. "My son was assaulted by a police officer while walking home from school," Elijah stated flatly. "It is personal, but that doesn't change the facts or the patterns of behavior in that department." Rodriguez nodded. "I agree. And for what it's worth, if it were my child, I'd be raising hell a lot louder than you are." She turned back to her screen. "We've obtained warrants for the department's electronic communications. That should give us insight into the informal culture there." By midday, the first results of that warrant revealed disturbing evidence. Rodriguez called Elijah to a secure conference room, where several analysts were reviewing the data. "We found an unofficial group chat among Oak Ridge officers," she explained, displaying redacted screenshots on the screen. "The content island." Illuminating. Elijah scanned the messages, his jaw tightening. Officers, including Barrett, regularly exchanged racist memes and comments about keeping Oak Ridge safe from undesirables and urban elements. More disturbing were references to specific incidents involving minority residents that had never been formally reported. "There's more," Rodriguez continued, bringing up another document. "We've identified a pattern in their arrest data. Officers receive unofficial commendations for arrests in certain neighborhoods, all predominantly minority areas. Barrett has the highest number of these quality arrests in the department." Elijah processed this information with growing concern. This suggests the discriminatory behavior is incentivized, not just tolerated. "Exactly," Rodriguez confirmed. "And Captain Reynolds appears to be directly involved in this unofficial reward system." As the investigation expanded, resistance began to form within certain corners of the Bureau. By late afternoon, Elijah was summoned to a meeting with Assistant Director Wilson from the Criminal Investigative Division, a 28-year veteran known for his conservative views on policing. Washington Wilson began without pleasantries. "I understand your personal stake in this, but there are concerns about the scope of resources being directed at a local police matter." Elijah met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, this isn't just about my son. The evidence already points to systematic civil rights violations affecting an entire community. That's squarely within our jurisdiction." Wilson leaned forward. "The police union is already crying foul, claiming we're overreaching because of your personal connection. They're suggesting you're using Bureau resources for a personal vendetta. The facts will speak for themselves," Elijah replied evenly. "Director Collins has approved the investigation, and I've formally recused myself from any operational involvement." The pushback wasn't unexpected, but it was a reminder of the entrenched resistance to police accountability, even within federal law enforcement. As Elijah navigated these internal politics, the investigation continued to uncover troubling evidence. By evening, Rodriguez had more findings to share. "We've identified at least 27 incidents in the past 3 years where excessive force was used against minority individuals, but never properly documented," she reported. "And we found communications between Captain Reynolds and several officers, including Barrett, discussing how to write reports to justify use of force after the fact." The evidence was damning, suggesting a department-wide culture of racial targeting and subsequent cover-ups. But the most disturbing discovery came just before Elijah left for the day. We found something else. Rodriguez said, her expression unusually troubled. There's evidence that someone from our field office has been feeding information to the Oak Ridge PD, warning them about potential federal oversight, advising them on how to avoid scrutiny. The revelation hit Elijah like a physical blow. The corruption extended into the FBI itself, someone who was supposed to uphold the highest standards of law enforcement. Do we know who, he asked? Rodriguez shook her head. Not yet, but we're narrowing it down. As Elijah drove home that evening, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. Assistant Director Washington, you should drop this investigation if you care about your family's safety. The voice was disguised, electronically altered. Accidents happen to people who don't know their place. Before Elijah could respond, the call ended. He immediately called Rodriguez to report the threat and then contacted the security team at his home. When he arrived, he found a police cruiser slowly driving past his house. It wasn't from the local jurisdiction that covered their neighborhood. It was an Oak Ridge police car over 20 miles outside its jurisdiction. The message was clear. We're watching you. Inside, he found Gabrielle in the home office, surrounded by legal documents. The emergency preservation order was granted, she informed him, and Judge Matthews has been assigned to our case. She looked up, noticing his expression. What happened? Elijah told her about the developments, including the threat and the police cruiser. Gabrielle's face hardened with resolve, rather than fear. They're scared, she said firmly. All of this, the threats, the intimidation, it means we're getting close to something they desperately want to hide. Upstairs, Marcus was finally sleeping peacefully after a difficult day. His face was still swollen, but the worst of the chemical burns had begun to heal. The emotional wounds, however, would take much longer to mend. As Elijah stood in his son's doorway watching him sleep, he faced the most difficult question of his career. How far was he willing to go to expose the truth? The evidence of corruption was mounting, but so were the risks to his family and his principles. The system he had dedicated his life to upholding was revealing its deepest flaws, and the path forward was anything but clear. The cell phone video hit social media like a bomb, the shaky footage showing Officer Barrett pepper-spraying 11-year-old Marcus Washington spreading across platforms with devastating speed. By morning, the clip had been viewed over 3 million times, with the hashtag number Justice for Marcus trending nationally. News vans lined the street outside the Oak Ridge Police Department, and protesters began gathering with hastily made signs demanding accountability. Inside their home, the Washington family watched the public reaction unfold with mixed emotions. CNN is requesting an interview, Gabrielle said, scrolling through her phone. So are MSNBC, Fox News, and every local station in the DMV area. Elijah sighed the weight of public scrutiny, adding to their already heavy burden. We need to be strategic about this. Once Marcus becomes the public face of this issue, there's no going back to normal. Marcus sat quietly at the kitchen table, absently pushing cereal around in his bowl. The swelling in his face had begun to subside, but dark circles under his eyes revealed his troubled sleep. Do I have to go back to school today? He asked, his voice small. Zoe placed a protective hand on her brother's shoulder. You don't have to do anything you don't want to squirt. Anyone who has a problem with you will have to deal with me first. Gabrielle approached her son, kneeling to meet his eyes. Principal Donovan called this morning. The school is aware of the situation and will provide whatever support you need. But it's your choice, Marcus. If you want to stay home for a few days, that's completely understandable. Marcus considered this, then straightened his shoulders slightly. Dad always says that hiding gives power to the people who want to make you afraid. He looked at his father. I want to go to school. I don't want Officer Barrett to think he won. The simple courage in his son's declaration filled Elijah with both pride and sorrow. At 11 years old, Marcus was already navigating the complex reality of being black in America with a wisdom beyond his years. When they arrived at Oak Ridge Middle School, the scene was tense. News trucks had gathered outside the main entrance, reporters clamoring for comments from arriving students and parents. Principal Donovan met them at a side entrance, ushering them quickly into the building. Marcus, we're so sorry about what happened, she said, her expression genuine. We've arranged for you to meet with our counselor at any time today, and all your teachers have been briefed. As they walked through the hallways, students turned to stare, conversations halting mid-sentence. Some offered supportive nods or fist bumps, while others averted their eyes uncomfortably. Marcus kept his head high, though Elijah could see the strain in his posture. Before leaving, Elijah pulled Principal Donovan aside. How are the other students reacting to this? Is there any concern about backlash? The principal hesitated. There's been division. Some families are very supportive of Marcus. Others have been defending Officer Barrett, suggesting there must be more to the story. She lowered her voice. Several parents have called asking that their children not be seated near Marcus, claiming he must have done something to provoke the officer. The casual cruelty of the assumption made Elijah's jaw tighten. My son was walking home from school. His only crime was existing in a space where someone decided he didn't belong. Principal Donovan nodded quickly. I understand, Mr. Washington. We're taking this very seriously. Any discriminatory behavior toward Marcus will not be tolerated. As the day progressed, the situation in Oak Ridge continued to escalate. By noon, over 200 protesters had gathered outside the police department, their chants for justice echoing through the downtown area. Counter-protesters had also appeared, about 50 strong, many wearing back the blue shirts and carrying signs supporting Officer Barrett. Local news coverage split along predictable lines. Woke emphasized the growing tension and divided community while giving significant airtime to police union representatives who urged waiting for all the facts. Progressive outlet Metro News focused on the racial disparities in Oak Ridge policing and Barrett's history of complaints. By the time school ended, the Washington family had received dozens of interview requests, including from national outlets and documentary filmmakers. We need to take control of this narrative, Gabrielle advised as they gathered in their living room. If we don't tell Marcus's story, others will fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. Zoe, who had been monitoring social media all day, reported troubling developments. Someone doxed us, she said grimly. Our address and phone number are being shared in these right-wing groups. They're calling Dad a race traitor for being in the FBI and going after a cop. The information sent a chill through the room. Elijah immediately called his FBI security contact to arrange protection for the family. That evening, the Oak Ridge Town Council held an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. The Washington family decided to attend, despite security concerns. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with news cameras positioned along the walls. Mayor Franklin, visibly uncomfortable, called for order as citizens lined up to speak. The first hour featured a parade of residents expressing outrage or support along predictable racial and political lines. Then Marcus was invited to speak. He approached the microphone looking small but determined. My name is Marcus Washington. I'm 11 years old, and on Tuesday I was walking home from coding club when Officer Barrett pepper-sprayed me and put me in handcuffs. His clear, steady voice carried through the hushed room. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just walking home through the park like I do every Tuesday. Someone called the police because they thought I didn't belong there. He paused, gathering his courage. This isn't just about me. It's about every kid who looks like me, who's afraid to walk through their own neighborhood. It's about being seen as dangerous just because of how you look. The room erupted in applause from one section and stony silence from another. Officer Barrett's supporters had come in force, many in uniform or wearing police-supportive clothing. One man stood up, interrupting the proceedings. What about Officer Barrett's rights? He was responding to a call. He has to make split-second decisions to protect the community. Others joined in the meeting, descending into shouting from both sides. Mayor Franklin banged his gavel repeatedly, struggling to regain control. Outside the meeting, a local news reporter thrust a microphone toward Elijah. Assistant Director Washington, some people are suggesting you're using your FBI position to wage a personal vendetta against the Oak Ridge Police Department. How do you respond? Elijah maintained his composure, aware that his every word would be scrutinized. This isn't about me or my position. It's about a system that allowed an officer to assault a child who was simply walking home from school. It's about accountability and ensuring that no other child faces what my son experienced. As they drove home, Marcus was quieter than usual, processing the community's divided response. Why do so many people believe I did something wrong? He finally asked. They don't even know me. Gabrielle turned in her seat to face him. People often choose what to believe, based on what makes them feel safer, Marcus. Some people need to believe that police officers only hurt people who deserve it because the alternative, that it could happen to anyone for no reason, is too frightening to accept. The explanation was honest, but did little to ease the injustice of it all. The following morning, the Oak Ridge Police Union held a press conference supporting Officer Barrett. Union President Michael Townsend, stood before the cameras presenting a carefully crafted narrative. Officer Barrett responded to a citizen call about suspicious activity near children. The subject made a sudden movement toward his waistband, creating a potential threat situation. Officer Barrett followed his training and department protocols to ensure public safety. The statement deliberately omitted Marcus's age and the fact that he was simply reaching for his phone. In response, Gabrielle released the complete video footage from their neighbor's camera, which clearly showed Marcus walking directly through the park, contradicting claims that he had been lurking or circling the playground. The video also captured Barrett's aggressive approach and Marcus's polite responses before the sudden escalation. The competing narratives played out across traditional and social media, with commentators and citizens taking sides along increasingly partisan lines. The incident was no longer just about what happened to Marcus. It had become a proxy for broader debates about race policing and justice in America. Have you ever witnessed how quickly a community can divide along racial lines when incidents like this occur? Comment number 1, if you believe communities should always support law enforcement without question. Or comment number 2, if you think police accountability is essential for justice. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories that expose how racial incidents reveal the hidden fractures in our communities. How will the Washington family navigate this increasing polarization while still seeking justice for Marcus? The investigation is about to uncover corruption that goes far deeper than anyone expected. The imposing facade of the Riverdale County Courthouse gleamed in the morning sun as Gabrielle Washington ascended the steps flanked by her legal team from Harrison, Miyazaki, and Washington. After 15 years as a partner at the prestigious civil rights firm, this case had become the most personal of her distinguished career. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom of Judge Carolyn Matthews was already filling with journalists, community members, and legal observers. At 62, Judge Matthews had a reputation for strict adherence to precedent and procedure, having been appointed to the federal bench by a conservative president 2 decades earlier. Her assignment to the case had initially concerned Gabrielle, who knew the judge's historical deference to law enforcement. Captain Thomas Reynolds sat with the Oak Ridge City Attorney and a high-powered lawyer from the police union's Legal Defense Fund. Officer Barrett was conspicuously seated at a separate table with his personal attorney, Arthur Whitmore, a former prosecutor who had built a lucrative practice defending police officers accused of misconduct. The physical separation was strategic, a visual suggestion that Barrett's actions were his alone, not departmental policy. All rise, called the bailiff as Judge Matthews entered the courtroom. After the formalities, the judge fixed her stern gaze on the assembled attorneys. This case has generated significant public attention, she noted. Let me be clear that this courtroom will not become a forum for political theater. We will proceed according to the evidence and the law, nothing more. She turned to Gabrielle. Miss Washington, I understand you've declined the city's settlement offer. Please explain your reasoning. Gabrielle rose the weight of both mother and attorney, evident in her poised demeanor. Your Honor, the city has offered monetary compensation contingent upon a non-disclosure agreement. While financial restitution is appropriate, the public interest demands transparency about the systematic failures that led to the assault on my 11-year-old client. Judge Matthews raised an eyebrow. Miss Washington, I note that you represent your own son in this matter. Are you certain this arrangement doesn't present a conflict of interest? The question was a strategic attack on Gabrielle's objectivity, one she had anticipated. Your Honor, the court has already addressed this issue in chambers. My firm's ethics committee has reviewed the matter, and we've appointed co-counsel precisely to address any potential conflicts. She gestured to her colleague, Sarah Chen, who nodded respectfully to the judge. Arthur Whitmore rose next, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority. Your Honor, we move to dismiss this case on grounds of qualified immunity. Officer Barrett was responding to a citizen complaint and following department protocols for suspicious persons. The Supreme Court has consistently held that officers cannot be held liable for reasonable actions taken in the line of duty. Gabrielle countered immediately. Your Honor, the Supreme Court has never extended qualified immunity to cover the pepper spraying of a compliant child who posed no threat and committed no crime. The video evidence clearly shows Marcus Washington walking directly through the park, contradicting claims that he was behaving suspiciously. Judge Matthews considered both arguments. The motion to dismiss is denied at this time. I'll review the qualified immunity question after discovery. It was a small victory, but Gabrielle knew the real battle was just beginning. The discovery process revealed the extent of the Oak Ridge Police Department's problematic practices. Internal documents showed that officers disproportionately stopped and searched minority residents with black citizens 13 times more likely to experience use of force than white residents. More disturbing were the performance evaluations, showing that officers like Barrett received positive reviews, specifically mentioning their proactive policing in problematic areas, all predominantly minority neighborhoods. During Barrett's deposition, Gabrielle methodically exposed the officer's biases. "Officer Barrett, in your 12 years with the department, how many complaints have been filed against you for excessive force?" Barrett shifted uncomfortably. "I don't recall the exact number." "Let me refresh your memory," Gabrielle said, sliding a document across the table. 6 formal complaints, all filed by minority individuals. 0 disciplinary actions taken. "Is that accurate?" Barrett's attorney objected to the characterization, but the question had achieved its purpose. The pattern was established. The deposition of Captain Reynolds proved even more revealing. Under Gabrielle's precise questioning, Reynolds admitted that the department had no specific training on interacting with minors, and that officers were evaluated partly on their activity metrics, essentially the number of stops and arrests they made. "Captain Reynolds," Gabrielle asked, "when you reviewed Officer Barrett's body camera footage of the incident with my son, did you observe any behavior that justified the use of pepper spray?" Reynolds hesitated, clearly caught between professional loyalty and legal jeopardy. The department determined that Officer Barrett's actions were within policy guidelines. "That wasn't my question," Gabrielle pressed. "Based on the video you reviewed, did Marcus Washington pose any threat that justified chemical assault?" After another long pause, Reynolds answered, "No, I did not observe a direct threat in the footage." The admission sent shockwaves through the department. By the following day, the police union had arranged for a prominent public relations firm to manage the growing crisis. Their strategy became clear when local media began running segments, questioning Marcus's behavior before the incident and highlighting recent property crimes in the Pinecrest Park area. The character assassination extended to social media, where anonymous accounts shared altered images, suggesting Marcus had been holding something in his hand when approached by Barrett. The Washington family's address was published on right-wing forums, along with Elijah's FBI office location. The threats became serious enough that the family temporarily relocated to a secure location. The turning point came during expert witness testimony. Dr. Benjamin Torres, a nationally recognized expert on implicit bias in policing, presented a devastating analysis of the Oak Ridge Police Department's practices. The data reveals a department-wide pattern of targeting minority residents for heightened scrutiny and enforcement, he testified. Officer Barrett's actions on that day were not an aberration, but a predictable outcome of institutional practices that treat black presence as inherently suspicious. Barrett's attorney attempted to discredit Dr. Torres on cross-examination. "Isn't it true that crime rates are statistically higher in some of these neighborhoods, justifying increased police presence?" Dr. Torres was prepared for this line of questioning. When controlling for socioeconomic factors and actual reported crimes, the disparities in police stops and use of force remain statistically significant. Put simply, a white child walking through Pinecrest Park would almost certainly not have been pepper sprayed for reaching toward his pocket. As public pressure mounted, the city attorney approached Gabrielle with an improved settlement, offered $2 million, a formal apology, and a commitment to department-wide reforms. The only condition was that Barrett would resign rather than be fired, allowing him to potentially seek employment in another jurisdiction. Gabrielle brought the offer to Marcus and Elijah that evening in their hotel room. "This is substantially better than their initial offer," she explained. The financial settlement would be held in trust for Marcus's education, and the reform commitments would include independent oversight of the department for 5 years. Marcus looked up from his homework. Would Officer Barrett still be a police officer somewhere else? Gabrielle nodded reluctantly. He would resign without an official finding of misconduct. "That's what the department is insisting on. Then someone else's kid might get hurt," Marcus said simply. "I don't want that." Elijah placed a hand on his son's shoulder, immensely proud of his moral clarity, yet concerned about the toll of a prolonged legal battle. The alternative is months or years of court proceedings, with no guarantee of a better outcome. The system is designed to protect officers like Barrett. Marcus considered this. "What would you do if it wasn't me? If it was someone else's kid?" The question cut to the heart of their principles. After a family discussion that lasted late into the night, they decided to reject the settlement and proceed to trial. The news that the Washington family had declined a multi-million-dollar settlement shifted public perception. Their willingness to pursue justice rather than financial gain undermined the narrative that they were opportunistically exploiting the incident. Judge Matthews, perhaps sensing the historical significance of the case, took the unusual step of allowing cameras in the courtroom for the trial. The city made one final attempt to avoid public proceedings, offering to terminate Barrett and implement all the requested reforms if the Washingtons would agree to limited confidentiality about the terms. Gabrielle presented this offer to Marcus with her professional assessment that it represented nearly everything they had been fighting for. Marcus thought carefully before responding. Will people know what really happened to me? Will they know why Officer Barrett lost his job? When Gabrielle explained that the specific terms would remain confidential, Marcus shook his head. Then other people won't know the truth. Other kids won't know what to do if it happens to them. His wisdom solidified their resolve. The trial would proceed with all the risks and potential rewards that entailed. As the court date approached, Barrett's attorney made a desperate move, filing a motion to exclude Marcus's testimony on the grounds that his father's FBI position had coached and contaminated the child's recollection of events. Judge Matthews denied the motion with uncharacteristic sharpness. The suggestion that a child victim should be prevented from testifying about his own experience is contrary to both legal precedent and basic principles of justice. The stage was set for a landmark case that would test not only the limits of qualified immunity, but the community's willingness to confront the reality of racial bias in policing. The encrypted message appeared on Elijah Washington's secure FBI phone at 2:17 a.m., its arrival breaking the brief respite of sleep he had finally managed to find. Need to meet. Not safe to talk electronically. Information about Oak Ridge PD that goes beyond your son's case. Tomorrow, 5 p.m., Roosevelt Memorial, North Side. The message came from an anonymous number using protocols only law enforcement would know. Elijah stared at the screen, weighing the potential risks against the promise of information. After consulting with Patricia Rodriguez and implementing appropriate security measures, he arrived at the designated meeting spot the following day. The man who approached him was Officer Michael Daniels, a 15-year veteran of the Oak Ridge Police Department who had been present at the station when Marcus was brought in. I should have spoken up sooner, Daniels began, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. What happened to your son was wrong, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Over the next 30 minutes, Daniels revealed a system of corruption far more extensive than even the FBI investigation had uncovered. It's not just racial profiling, he explained, handing over a thumb drive. Barrett and 5 other officers have been running what they call the Neighborhood Integrity Program. They target specific areas, all minority neighborhoods, for aggressive enforcement. But here's the thing, they get bonuses for every arrest that leads to a conviction. Off-the-books cash payments. Elijah's training kept his expression neutral, despite his shock. Who authorizes these payments? It goes all the way up to Captain Reynolds, maybe higher, Daniels continued. The department has a slush fund from civil asset forfeitures. No oversight, no accounting. They call it performance incentives, but it's basically a bounty system targeting Black and Hispanic residents. The thumb drive contained damning evidence spreadsheets tracking officers' productivity in minority neighborhoods, complete with payouts, edited body camera footage where officers' problematic statements had been removed before submission to courts, and most disturbing, a messaging group where officers, including Barrett, openly discussed targeting minority residents and covering for each other's misconduct. Elijah brought the evidence to Rodriguez immediately. After verifying its authenticity, the FBI expanded its investigation, obtaining warrants for financial records that revealed an elaborate scheme. Officers received cash bonuses ranging from $500 to $3,000 for arrests in designated high-priority areas, with higher amounts for arrests leading to felony convictions. The practice had been ongoing for over 4 years and involved at least 11 officers and 3 supervisors, including Captain Reynolds. The scheme extended beyond the police department. City Manager Robert Wilson had approved budget allocations that indirectly funded these performance bonuses while maintaining plausible deniability about their true purpose. More disturbingly, Assistant District Attorney James Parker had worked with Captain Reynolds to ensure that cases from these targeted arrests received priority prosecution, maintaining artificially high conviction rates that justified continued funding. As the FBI's investigation accelerated, someone within the Oak Ridge power structure panicked. The department's internal server experienced a suspicious malfunction with key files being deleted. Fortunately, the FBI had already secured copies of all relevant documents. The attempt at evidence destruction only added obstruction of justice to the growing list of potential charges. Within the Oak Ridge Police Department, the blue wall of silence began to crack. 2 more officers came forward providing testimony about how they were instructed to modify reports involving use of force against minority citizens. One officer revealed that she had been passed over for promotion after questioning the department's enforcement priorities in minority neighborhoods. Most damning was the testimony of a former administrative assistant who had processed the cash payments and maintained the shadow accounting system that tracked the performance bonuses. She provided text messages from Captain Reynolds, explicitly directing her to keep these transactions off the official books. The corruption reached into Elijah's own organization as well. The FBI's internal investigation identified Special Agent Gregory Harmon as the source of leaked information to the Oak Ridge Police Department. Harmon, who had previously worked with Captain Reynolds on a joint task force, had been warning the department about potential federal scrutiny and advising them on methods to conceal their activities. He was immediately placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges. As evidence of systemic corruption mounted, previous victims of the Oak Ridge Police Department's targeted enforcement began coming forward. 23 individuals, all minorities, described similar experiences of being stopped without cause, subjected to excessive force, and in some cases having evidence planted to justify arrests. Their stories formed a pattern that matched the department's high productivity periods identified in the financial records. Marcus Washington wasn't just one incident. He was part of a deliberate, orchestrated campaign targeting minorities for enforcement to generate financial rewards for officers. The Washington family received an unexpected ally when Officer Jessica Morales from the Oak Ridge PD contacted Gabrielle directly. "I can't be part of this system anymore," she explained during their confidential meeting. "I joined to protect people, not to target them based on their race." Morales provided internal communications showing that after Marcus's incident went public, Captain Reynolds had directed officers to delete potentially incriminating messages and to align their statements to support Barrett's version of events. She also revealed that Barrett had been specifically patrolling Pinecrest Park because it was considered a boundary area where affluent white neighborhoods bordered more diverse communities. Officers were encouraged to maintain the boundary by scrutinizing minorities who entered these spaces. The evidence Morales provided was powerful, but using it presented a dilemma for the Washington family. As a whistleblower, Morales faced significant personal and professional risks. Additionally, some of the evidence she provided may have been obtained in ways that could compromise its admissibility in court. Elijah faced a profound ethical question. Should he use his FBI authority to ensure this evidence was properly entered into the official investigation, potentially risking his own position if proper protocols weren't followed, or should he maintain strict professional boundaries, even if it meant justice might be delayed or denied? The decision became even more complicated when the Oak Ridge Police Department made another settlement offer. This one unprecedented in its scope. Barrett would be terminated immediately. Reynolds would resign. The department would accept 5 years of federal oversight, and the financial settlement would be doubled to $4 million. The catch? A strict confidentiality agreement that would prevent any disclosure of the systemic corruption evidence. The city's attorneys emphasized that this was their final offer before trial. "They're desperate," Gabrielle noted as she presented the offer to the family. "They know what we've uncovered goes far beyond one incident. This is about protecting the entire power structure." Marcus, who had been listening quietly, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. "If we take the money and keep quiet, what happens to all the other people they hurt? What about the next kid that evening?" As Elijah contemplated his son's moral clarity, he received another encrypted message, this one from Patricia Rodriguez. "Grand jury being convened tomorrow. Need decision on whistleblower evidence. The moment of truth had arrived." By morning, the Oak Ridge Police Union had caught wind of the expanded investigation and announced a potential blue flu, a coordinated sick-out by officers if any criminal charges were filed against Barrett or other members of the class department. The threat was a desperate attempt to maintain leverage as their position weakened. the Washington family gathered for a final strategy session with their legal team. The choice before them was clear: accept a substantial settlement that would address their personal injury, but potentially allow aspects of the corruption to remain hidden, or reject the offer and push for complete transparency and accountability with all the uncertainty that entailed. Marcus, who had grown visibly in confidence throughout the ordeal, spoke with a wisdom beyond his years. Dad always says that real change doesn't come from taking the easy path. He looked at his father. I think we need to show them the truth. Elijah nodded, pride mixing with resolution. Then that's what we'll do. He contacted Rodriguez, authorizing the full use of all whistleblower evidence through proper legal channels, regardless of the professional consequences to himself. The decision set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just the Oak Ridge Police Department, but potentially policing practices across the region. The grand jury would hear evidence not just about one officer's assault on a child, but about a systematic effort to target minority communities for profit. The corruption that had festered in darkness would finally be exposed to the cleansing light of justice. The hushed courtroom fell completely silent as Marcus Washington approached the witness stand. At 11 years old, his small frame seemed almost swallowed by the massive wooden chair, yet his composure radiated a dignity that commanded respect from everyone present. Judge Carolyn Matthews, known for her stern demeanor, softened visibly as she addressed him. Marcus, do you understand what it means to tell the truth in court? Marcus nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. It means telling exactly what happened, not leaving anything out or adding anything that didn't happen. His voice was clear and steady, betraying none of the anxiety that had kept him awake the previous night. Over the next 45 minutes, Marcus recounted the events at Pinecrest Park with remarkable precision and composure. He described his walk home from Coding Club Officer Barrett's aggressive approach, and the moment when reaching for his phone to call his father resulted in being pepper sprayed and handcuffed. Throughout his testimony, Marcus never embellished or exaggerated. He simply told his truth, his eyes occasionally meeting Barrett's across the courtroom without flinching. When Barrett's attorney, Arthur Whitmore, began his cross-examination with condescending questions about whether Marcus might have misunderstood the officer's intentions, Marcus responded with a clarity that left the attorney visibly flustered. Sir, I didn't misunderstand the pepper spray in my eyes or the handcuffs on my wrists, Marcus stated simply. I was walking home from school. I told Officer Barrett my dad was FBI. I reached for my phone to call him, and Officer Barrett pepper sprayed me. The spectators in the courtroom murmured their approval until Judge Matthews called for order. The following day, Officer Richard Barrett took the stand, his testimony, a stark contrast to Marcus's straightforward account. Barrett appeared confident, initially reciting the narrative he had maintained. Since the incident, he had responded to a citizen call about suspicious activity, observed behavior he deemed concerning, and took action when Marcus made a sudden movement toward his pocket. But under Gabrielle Washington's methodical cross-examination, Barrett's facade began to crumble. Officer Barrett Gabrielle began the department's use of force policy, states that pepper spray should only be deployed against active resistance or to prevent imminent harm. Which of these criteria did my 11-year-old son meet? Barrett shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, in the field we have to make split-second decisions based on perceived threats. Please answer the question, Officer Barrett. Which specific criterion in your department's written policy justified pepper spraying a child who was simply reaching for his phone? As Barrett struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't incriminate him, Gabrielle presented the court with the recently discovered evidence of the department's Neighborhood Integrity Program and its financial incentives for arrests in minority areas. Officer Barrett, in the 12 months prior to this incident, you received 8 separate cash bonuses totaling $17,000 for arrests in what the department designated as high-priority enforcement zones. Is that correct? Barrett's eyes widened. I don't recall the specific amounts. Let me refresh your memory, Gabrielle continued, displaying financial records on the courtroom screen. This spreadsheet maintained by Captain Reynolds tracks your productivity metrics and corresponding bonuses. The highlighted entry from 2 days before you assaulted my son shows a note from Captain Reynolds. Barrett needs 2 more quality arrests this month to meet quota for Q2 bonus. The revelation sent shockwaves through the quota courtroom. Barrett's attorney objected vehemently, but Judge Matthews overruled him, allowing the evidence as relevant to establishing pattern and motivation. By the time Barrett stepped down from the witness stand, his credibility was in tatters, his previous confidence replaced by visible anxiety about the potential criminal implications of the financial scheme that had now been exposed in federal court. The most unexpected testimony came on the trial's fourth day when Officer Jessica Morales took the stand. As one of the few female officers in the Oak Ridge Police Department and the only Hispanic supervisor, Morales had risked everything by coming forward. The department maintained two separate standards of enforcement, she testified. In predominantly white neighborhoods, officers were instructed to be courteous, to issue warnings, to practice community policing. In minority neighborhoods, the directive was to maintain zero tolerance and to maximize arrests for even minor infractions. When asked why she had decided to break the code of silence, Morales glanced at Marcus before answering, "Because that could have been my son. Because I became a police officer to protect people, not to target them based on their race. And because remaining silent makes me complicit in a system that betrays everything the badge is supposed to represent." Her testimony opened the floodgates. 3 more officers came forward confirming the existence of the bonus system and the deliberate targeting of minority residents. The most damning testimony came from Officer Michael Daniels, who revealed that Captain Reynolds had instructed officers to edit their body camera footage before submission and had personally directed the department's IT specialist to delete incriminating messages after Marcus's case gained national attention. As the trial entered its second week, the city's attorneys approached Gabrielle with yet another settlement offer, this one essentially surrendering to all the Washington family's demands. Gabrielle brought the offer to Marcus and Elijah, explaining that accepting it would achieve everything they had fought for without the uncertainty of a jury verdict. The department will be placed under a consent decree for comprehensive reform, she explained. Barrett will be terminated and permanently barred from law enforcement. Reynolds and 5 other officers will face criminal charges. And the settlement amount is now $5 million with no confidentiality restrictions. Marcus considered the offer thoughtfully. "Will other kids be safer if we accept this?" Gabrielle nodded. The consent decree includes mandatory body cameras with civilian review, implicit bias training, and an independent monitor for at least 5 years. "It's actually more oversight than we might get from a verdict," Elijah added. "And the criminal cases will proceed regardless of our civil settlement. The evidence of corruption is now in the hands of federal prosecutors." After careful consideration, the Washington family accepted the settlement, bringing the civil trial to an end while the criminal investigations continued. Judge Matthews, in an unusual move, issued a public statement along with her approval of the settlement. The evidence presented in this case reveals not just an isolated incident of excessive force, but a systematic perversion of justice that targeted citizens based on their race. This settlement represents not merely compensation for a single victim, but a mandate for fundamental reform. In the months that followed, the consequences of Marcus Washington's case reverberated throughout the criminal justice system. Officer Richard Barrett was indicted on federal civil rights violations and fraud charges related to the bonus scheme. Captain Thomas Reynolds faced more serious charges of conspiracy, evidence tampering, and misappropriation of public funds. City Manager Robert Wilson and Assistant District Attorney James Parker were also indicted for their roles in facilitating and covering up the discriminatory enforcement program. The FBI agent who had leaked information to the department, Gregory Harmon, pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The Oak Ridge Police Department was placed under the supervision of a federal monitor with comprehensive reforms that transformed its practices and culture. New leadership was brought in from outside, prioritizing community engagement and unbiased enforcement. For the Washington family, the resolution brought a measure of justice, but the emotional impact of the ordeal remained. Marcus, with the support of therapy and his family's unwavering love, gradually reclaimed his sense of security, though certain triggers like seeing police cars or walking through the park could still provoke anxiety. 6 months after the settlement, Marcus made a courageous decision. With his parents' support, he established the Marcus Washington Youth Advocacy Program, using a portion of the settlement funds to help young people understand their rights and navigate encounters with law enforcement. The program quickly expanded to include mentorship opportunities, connecting successful minority professionals with children from underserved communities. On a warm spring afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after the incident, Marcus stood at the edge of Pinecrest Park, hesitating slightly before stepping onto the path. Elijah walked beside him, a protective presence, but allowing his son to set the pace. "You don't have to do this today," he reminded Marcus gently. "We can come back another time." Marcus shook his head. "I need to do this, Dad. I can't let them take this place from me forever." As they walked through the park, they noticed the changes that had resulted from the case. A new community policing center had been established at the park's edge, staffed by officers who reflected the diversity of the broader community. Children of all races played together on the playground where Karen Fletcher had once called the police about an unfamiliar black child. When they reached the spot where Barrett had pepper-sprayed Marcus, they paused. "It still makes me angry sometimes," Marcus admitted. "Not just what happened to me, but knowing it could have been anyone who looked like me." Elijah nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "That anger is valid, Marcus. The question is what we do with it." Marcus looked up at his father. "That's why I want to keep telling my story. So maybe someday kids won't need to be taught how to survive a police stop just because of their skin color." The following week, Elijah implemented a new FBI initiative focused on law enforcement accountability nationwide. Drawing on the lessons from Oak Ridge, the program established federal standards for unbiased policing and created mechanisms for identifying departments with problematic patterns before they escalated to the level of civil rights violations. Gabrielle, meanwhile, had been appointed to the state's newly formed Commission on Police Reform, where she worked to translate the painful lessons of her son's experience into structural changes that would protect other families. The Washington family's ordeal had transformed not just their own lives, but sparked a movement for accountability that continued to grow. As Marcus stood before a group of young people at his advocacy program's first official meeting, he shared the wisdom he had gained through trauma and resilience. "Change doesn't happen by itself," he told them. "Sometimes it takes one person standing up and telling their truth even when it's scary, especially when it's scary." The journey that had begun with a moment of injustice in a suburban park had become a catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond one family or one police department. It was a reminder that systems only change when brave individuals refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Have you ever witnessed how one person's courage can create ripples of change throughout an entire community? This story shows how speaking truth to power, even when it comes at personal cost, can transform broken systems. If Marcus's story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to see more stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Comment below with your thoughts on police accountability and racial justice. What changes do you think are still needed in our communities? Thank you for joining me for this powerful journey of injustice, courage, and transformation. Remember that in the face of systemic injustice, your voice matters. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. This powerful story teaches us that racial injustice persists, even in systems meant to protect all citizens equally. Marcus's experience reveals how bias can transform routine moments into life-altering trauma for Black Americans. The Washington family's journey demonstrates that accountability requires both courage and persistence, often against powerful institutions designed to resist change. True justice demands more than individual consequences. It requires addressing the systemic roots of discrimination. The story highlights how privilege operates in America's justice system. Despite Elijah and Gabrielle's professional success and connections, their sons still faced racial profiling, proving that no amount of achievement fully shields Black Americans from discrimination. Yet their privileged positions allowed them to fight back effectively where others might lack resources. Perhaps most importantly, we see how speaking truth can create meaningful change. Marcus's willingness to share his story publicly, despite personal cost, catalyzed reforms benefiting countless others. His courage reminds us that even the youngest voices can spark transformation when they refuse to be silenced. The corrupting influence of incentive systems that reward aggressive policing in minority communities shows how racism becomes institutionalized through seemingly neutral policies. Real change requires examining not just individual actions, but the structures that encourage and reward discriminatory behavior. Have you or someone you know ever experienced racial profiling or witnessed discrimination based on skin color? How did that moment change your perspective on justice in America? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe these conversations about racial justice and accountability are essential, Please hit that like button to help this story reach more viewers. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate those brave enough to fight back. These narratives deserve to be heard, and your subscription helps amplify voices that might otherwise be silenced. Would you have the courage to reject a multi-million-dollar settlement to ensure the truth was fully exposed as the Washington family did? What systems in your community might need similar examination and reform? Tag someone who inspires you with their commitment to justice, and share this video to spark these crucial conversations. Thank you for bearing witness to Marcus's journey. May his story remind us all that justice requires more than good intentions. It demands action, accountability, and the courage